So good morning, good afternoon. You're very welcome to room one on day 2 of the ABLE annual meeting. We have a great selection of speakers going to be happening in this room. Don't leave. You are allowed, of course, leave, but I would encourage you that we have some great speakers, a lot happening in this room over the next 3 hours. My name is Lisa Donaldson. Greetings from sunny Dublin in Ireland. And I'm a member of ABLE, and my job today is as moderator for this room. So can I just encourage you to participate as much as you're comfortable in doing. You can use the chat to pose any questions or share any resources as relevant to the proceedings. And I will try and keep an eye on the chat as our first speaker is presenting. Just before I introduce our first speaker, can I just draw your attention as well that transcripts should be on. I'm going to enable those now, and you will be able to turn on live closed captioning if you so wish. We will edit this afterwards to ensure that it is closer to reality, particularly with my accent. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So can I please welcome Karen Jackson Weaver from New York University. And she's going to be speaking to you in our first conversation session. And Karen will have 1 hour to talk to you about innovation, equity-centric and accessible, creating new portfolios for a post-COVID campus. So I'm very excited myself to hear what you're going to say, Karen. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'll give you a reminder about 10 minutes to go.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Lisa, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for all of the work that you and the board of ABLE do in making sure that we're here to gather and to have this wonderful conversation and meeting. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's great to see all of you. I'm greeting you from New York City. Here in the United States, and it's great to be a part of this conversation and to be able to facilitate this really important topic. We don't have a lot of time, so I want to jump right in. And because it is a conversation session, this will be very interactive, and I invite your comments, your thoughts, and your feedback. And so I'm going to get started with sharing my screen so that we can start the PowerPoint. And we're going to play from the start. All right, hopefully everyone can see, yes? Excellent, excellent. So as Lisa indicated, the focus of our conversation this morning is innovation, equity-centric, and accessible, creating e-portfolios for a post-COVID campus. Now, I think all of us know we're not technically in a post-COVID climate, but I think for many of us last year was an opportunity to engage and deal with the challenges of COVID in real time. And so in many ways, as we resume our studies in the fall, and as we head back to our campuses, whether in person or in hybrid formats, I'm using the terminology post-COVID campus for the presentation to give us context to think about our engagement with ePortfolios. So for our time together today, we're going to have conversation, talk about COVID context. I want to share a little bit about NYU as a case study, and then also highlight some key concepts and frameworks that I think will be useful, followed by action planning and next steps. And as Lisa indicated, this is a conversation. So I want us to talk, I want us to be interactive, and I want to start off with the question that's kind of embedded in the title of our talk this morning or afternoon. Please either unmute yourself or put in the chat, what does innovation mean to you? What does innovation mean in your context? So I can't see you because I'm in presentation mode. So Lisa, I will look to you to see if there are people who have their hands raised, but I do invite you to please share your thoughts in the chat. We're going to just take a couple of seconds to share our thoughts on what does innovation mean to you and what does innovation mean in your context. So if there's anyone who wants to volunteer, please do so. And if you want to share your thoughts in the chat, please share. All right, I see Paul saying trying something new that might help students. Absolutely. Amy has finding new solutions to reoccurring or sudden problems. Yes, right? When we think of innovation new, we think of things that are going to help us to reimagine problems or issues. Charlotte put in something that's new, that's possibly a fad, right? These are great. something that responds to or elicits change. Thank you for that, Allie. And then Cindy has, I agree with Paul, trying something new that really helps our students. And then Jason shared, innovation means developing new products, such as curricula or processes that address current or upcoming concerns. And then Carly put in, attempting something new or different for a desired effect. Yes, all of these are wonderful. Let's keep going. What does equity-centric mean to you? What does equity-centric mean in your context? That was one of the things that we talked about, or we alluded to this morning in our title. We want to think about innovation. We also want to think about equity-centric models and approaches as we engage ePortfolios with our campus. So Lisa shared meeting everyone where they are at and exploring new and unfamiliar change. Together, we have different or unique skills and we can learn together. Yes, yes, wonderful, Lisa, love that. Other thoughts on equity-centric? I think someone is unmuted now. Was there someone who wanted to share? Okay, if not, I'm going to continue to share thoughts from the chat. Carly put in accessible content and materials for all. Yes, and we're going to come back to that term in a bit, accessible. Ryan shared equity-centric means bringing perspectives and people at the margins to the center. Absolutely, having an integrative approach. Inclusivity, accessibility for all students is what Chloe shared. Sonia has centering corrective justice to make sure historically excluded populations get access to opportunities. Carly included meeting students where they are and helping discover, provide, or access tools to help them move forward. Yes, Sonia, Carly, right on point. These are great, great ways of describing equity-centric approaches. And then Paul shared looking at my teaching goals and then matching them to all students' needs and access issues. Exactly, Paul. Thank you for that. Lisa shared attempting to provide choice and demonstration of skills and access in multiple formats. And then finally, Andy shared rewarding faculty for doing the work of suitable teaching. Oh, okay, rewarding faculty for doing the work of suitable teaching as it relates to equity. Thanks for that, Andy. Absolutely. All right, last question before we jump into some other conversation points today. And I've heard this term referred to as we described equity-centric. And what does equity-centric mean in your context? So if you could, in the chat, share with us, what does accessible mean to you? We use it in a lot of different contexts, in a lot of different ways, but what does accessible mean to you? And what does accessible mean in your context? And by that, I mean accessible or accessibility. We use those terms interchangeably. So if you can share in the chat, what does it mean to be accessible? And what does it mean to have a focus on accessibility? And again, you can share your thoughts in the chat. Okay, Allie shared reducing or removing barriers to learning and participation. Absolutely. Lisa shared designing beyond the margins. Yes. Amy shared creating learning and teaching environments where differences are valued as strengths that are different opportunities for engaging with content, and success can be individualized. Absolutely. Claire shared with us offering programs on different platforms for students who might not be able to make an in-person or virtual appointment. Absolutely. These are all fabulous ways to think about accessible and accessibility. And then finally, Maria shared making content understandable and engaging to people from different backgrounds. Yes. Paul shared it means having the technology needed. It also means allowing students to learn using their unique perspectives. And Carly also highlighted that students are aware of and able to use tools to help them reach their goals. But I love the removing of barriers description. I do too. Absolutely. These are all wonderful. And what I wanted to do this morning is to give us those ways of thinking about what it means to be innovative and couple that with what it means to be equity-centric and to create resources and ways of leveraging ePortfolios as a tool to gain more in terms of accessibility and creating accessible platforms for our students. I want us, however, to think about as we transition back to our campuses in the fall, some of you may actually be doing summer teaching or preparing for the fall. and the spring as well. But I wanted to just share some data from a few studies that have been done with regards to COVID-19 and how it has played out on our campuses. And so you can see here on this chart that the most challenging aspect of COVID-19 for students, primarily the most extremely challenging aspect was being away from friends, right? Not having that sense of community. We also see that on-site classes moving to online was an extremely challenging aspect. You can also see in the chart here that there is an impact on students' class schedule, the financial burden that comes along with this, getting help from tutoring and advising online, as well as loss of campus housing or a meal plan. So I wanted you to see this and think about this as we have our conversation today. But I also wanted us to think about how institutions are handling the crisis and what students have said. So you can see here on this chart in terms of very satisfied to very dissatisfied, different areas related to how students responded to their institutions and how they handled COVID-19. On the left-hand side, you can see different categories, which include communication, the shift to courses online, understanding meeting my needs, shifting support services, supporting my research projects, belonging to a community, and providing financial support. And you can see here in the chart that it varies, in terms of how students view being very satisfied or satisfied to being neutral, and in some cases dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. And then finally, I wanted to share kind of this overall sentiment from students as they think about COVID-19, overall, what has been their experience. And with this data, we were able to see in the study information based on how students responded in terms of their satisfaction and what they were dissatisfied with. Interestingly enough, in the study that was done, you can see here that students with disabilities or who identified as needing additional support showed the most satisfaction, followed by first generation students, then students who self-identify as low income, students who are 25 or over, and then part-time students. And this came from research that Elliot Felix and Tatiana Garcia did on students' first impressions during spring. And I'll be happy to share the website with you at the end. And it has a number of different charts and graphs that really highlight the preliminary work they did when COVID first kind of emerged last year on many of our campuses. And I loved how they concluded their study. They're still looking at how COVID has impacted our campuses. But I love one of the statements in there at the end. They kind of highlight some of the things that they recommend that we do as we return to our campuses in the fall. And they say in the study, going forward, colleges and universities must focus on providing opportunities for students to equitably learn and grow, to belong to a community that supports and challenges them, and to make an impact while building the 21st century skills they need and understand the key role that campuses today play in the student experiences. Again, you will see that this ties back into kind of the thematic focus that we had on being equity-centric, on being innovative, and making sure that as a learning tool that e-portfolios are accessible to everyone. Now, I want to think about how this applies in our context. And if you all could just share again in the chat, when you go back to campus this fall, what's going to be the primary mode of teaching? Are many of you going to be in person? Is it going to be hybrid? At NYU last year, our students transitioned in the spring to being on campus, but it was primarily online. This year, we're going to be in person. And I see a number of you have put in the chat. Cindy shared in person. Ali shared online. Sonia is going to be in person. Chloe said online. Mark shared in person, back to about 97% of the pre-COVID rates for our department. That's great. Andy, Emily also shared in person. Richard shared face-to-face at this point. Elise in person. Charlotte shared hybrid and might need to transition to online. Paul shared in person and online. And then Celine shared in person. So as you can see, we have a myriad of approaches that we're going to be using. Now, I want you also to share what you imagine to be the biggest challenge for your campus community. And I don't just mean students, but perhaps faculty and staff as well. What do you see from where you sit from your vantage point as being the biggest challenge as you transition? For us at NYU, we're going from this kind of online, kind of the shift that we had to all make to being back in person. And so that's going to be an adjustment for our faculty. Lisa shared that 30% of online and blending, 30% are online, and there's also a blended and remaining as well face-to-face. Adrian shared that in terms of challenge, there's the issue of burnout. A lot of us have had to put in extra time, energy, planning, and resources. And so many of the faculty, our staff, and even our students are suffering from burnout, right? So hopefully this summer has been an opportunity to rejuvenate and to revitalize. But I think many of us have been zoomed out, quite frankly. And so burnout is a real issue. Paul shared feeling safe in terms of COVID for those just returning to campus, right? So social distancing, wearing masks, hand washing, all of those things are going to come into play as we return to in-person teaching and learning. Richard shared protecting vulnerable populations from infection. Absolutely. So we have students from the entire gamut coming back, and we want to make sure our students, our faculty, and our staff all feel safe. Ali shared pedagogical challenges of teaching online, stress about safety on campus. Absolutely. Charlotte shared communication and financial resources. For sure. These are going to be huge issues. How do we make sure we're sharing real-time updates and we provide financial resources that are needed, not only to help students, but for faculty and staff who are providing support to our student community? Sonia shared that the biggest challenge is going to be that we really don't understand how this is affecting us. We also want certainty, but there are no guarantees. Sonia, you hit the nail on the head, and that's one of the things I want us to think about this morning or this afternoon, the challenges and how we face them, right? And Mark also shared, expectations, right? If students want to shift to online learning from being in person, how do we imagine that? And then Lisa also highlighted this. How are we reimagining our campus culture, right? A lot has changed in terms of priorities, habits, and desires. And Lisa pointed out that that's going to be something that we're all going to have to address, reimagining our campus cultures. For our purposes today, I want us to also think about e-portfolios as a learning tool. Can each of you share in the chat how you envision leveraging e-portfolios as a learning tool, especially given our post-COVID climate, or I should say our COVID climate, depending on how you think about it? So what are ways that you imagine really making the most of e-portfolios as a learning tool, especially with all that we are going to be facing as a teaching community as we think about COVID? So if you can share your thoughts in the chat, that would be great. How do you envision leveraging e-portfolios as a learning tool, particularly in the context of a post-COVID or COVID climate? And I will say, in terms of feedback, one of the things that Carly mentioned is the issue of COVID and the type of trauma that our students, our faculty, and staff have faced. And I think that's so true. We're going to have to really address how that's impacted our entire campus community. Paul shared one way we can be mindful of using the e-portfolio is Paul is sharing that they want to implement it in the fall, and he thinks that reflection will be very important post-COVID. Absolutely, Paul. Thank you for that. Making sure that the portfolio is a tool for people to be reflective. Lisa shared personalized and experiential learning and opportunities. Absolutely. Amy shared it's a great way for students to tell their story, and it's going to help us as educators, as faculty, to understand and respond to student needs. Mark shared it's going to be a chance and an opportunity for students to express their skills and abilities to still move forward under significant and sudden change. Charlotte shared that it's going to be a great way for students to reflect on what they've learned. Amy highlighted that it's going to be an opportunity for reflection and integrative learning, helping students to see and feel connected. Absolutely. Brandy highlighted that it will provide more opportunities to have interns view each other's easily and build community by commenting and peer review. For sure, leveraging that virtual community is going to be really important. Adrian shared base reflective assignments on the e-portfolio to provide purposeful space for students to break down experiences and future goals in light of COVID as a developing professional. Absolutely. Ali shared the e-portfolio can build connection between instructor and student, as well as peer-to-peer. Cindy shared that it's going to be a great tool to reflect on how courses are progressing and how the learning environment is for our students. Carly shared it's a holistic snapshot of students, their growth, their learning, and their experience. And then Sonia shared that she has primarily used e-portfolios to help students integrate their lived experience and academic identity. And she thinks that it will help them to continue to help them understand what's happened. Absolutely. Chloe shared that the ePortfolio is a great way for students to express themselves and to also share with their peers. And then we also have a comment that using the ePortfolio as a method that connects digital experiences and personal physical interactions is something that we can leverage, particularly within a COVID environment. So thank you all for these fabulous, fabulous comments and reflections on ways to leverage the ePortfolio as a learning tool. In the time that we have today, I want to talk to you a little bit about the work that we've done at NYU. And I kind of want to use this as a way to think of maybe perhaps what we've done as a case study. We are very new to using ePortfolios. In my role as a vice president of global faculty engagement and innovation advancement, I work with our faculty primarily in New York, but throughout our global network to think about what it means to create accessible classrooms that are innovative, that are inclusive, but that also allow us to address all of our student needs. So our office is a new unit within NYU. We report into the president's office, but we work very closely with the office of the provost. And we are led by a phenomenal leader, Dr. Lisa Coleman. She's our senior vice president of innovation. And she really is a visionary and has helped us to think about what it means to think about global inclusion, diversity, and strategic innovation in a global context and what it means for students, faculty, and staff. This is our mission in terms of thinking about creating a thriving and inclusive global community. And our vision is to really leverage the fact that we're a dynamic global community where inclusion and academic excellence are interdependent. And then I mentioned earlier that I'm based in New York City, but we have degree granting campuses in the Middle East and Abu Dhabi, as well as in Asia and Shanghai. And we have campuses in Africa and Asia and Europe, Latin America, and even Sydney, Australia. So as we think about ePortfolios and using this as a resource for our students, when we have nearly 80,000 undergraduate and graduate students, we want to really think about ways to empower faculty to use ePortfolios as a learning tool, as a way to really help them think about how to integrate this into their teaching, particularly as we think about returning to in-person learning in the fall, and then any pivots that we may need to make as we all see the numbers going up in many instances of COVID. With our office, in addition to supporting faculty with resources, leadership, research, training, and development, we also try to work with our faculty and our staff on promoting strategic innovation and sustainable growth. And a lot of the work we also do leverages cross-sector partnerships and external engagement. I want to talk a little bit about climate and the work that we've done in terms of assessment. And before I arrived in 2018, and before our unit was formed, and actually our unit was formed as a result of this climate survey that we did. And it was a way to really try to understand what students, faculty, and staff were saying about the learning, living, and working community at NYU. We had over 21,000 surveys respondents with a 31% response rate. And we were excited to see that we had faculty, staff, and administrators, as well as undergraduate and graduate students participate. I wanted to highlight a few things that I think you'll find interesting. We noted with our undergraduate population, for students who seriously considered leaving, the lack of a sense of belonging was the number one issue that students identified, not financial support, not personal reasons, but a lack of a sense of belonging, 63.2%. What's even more interesting is that the same number was evident with our graduate student population, a lack of sense of belonging, 43.1%. Again, not that financial reasons aren't important for our graduate students. You can see that at 34.7%. But with our undergraduate and graduate communities, we found lack of sense of belonging. And interestingly enough, the context of the exclusionary conduct often took place in a classroom or a lab, 42.6%. So what we wanted to do was to be engaged and thoughtful about how do we address these issues that our students and our faculty and staff are highlighting in terms of creating a sense of belonging. So we were fortunate to form committees with our students, with our faculty, as well as with our staff. And there were major themes that emerged from the Being at NYU, which ultimately morphed into work we're doing now on a campus-wide global initiative called Be Together. And you can see here, these are issues not just for students in terms of the need for mentoring and professional development, but for our staff, for our faculty as well. And so you'll see a number of issues, and these were all themes that emerged from those committees that we convened, where individuals, whether they were students, faculty, or staff, said they wanted more opportunities for mobility, for leadership, for our faculty in particular. They wanted to learn more about pedagogy and teaching and innovative models and what that means. And I'm not going to read through all of these, but I just wanted to give you some context in terms of some of the issues that we raised in the chat about first generation students and socioeconomic status. For us as an administration, thinking about communication and belonging and what that means in terms of transparency and trust. For transgender, transspectrum, and gender nonconforming awareness that needed to be apparent for our faculty, our staff, as well as our students, and making sure that we're doing all that we can to create a disability inclusive culture within our campus with sensitivity to race, gender, as well as Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and anti-Muslim sentiments. What we wanted to also do is use this as an opportunity to educate our campus community about the research, right? What does the research say? And so we wanted to highlight scholars, not just at NYU, like Professor Kenji Yoshino, who's at our law school, who does work on covering, but Dolly Chugh as well. She's at the Stern School of Business and talks about bias. And we wanted to highlight the work that the faculty there, as well as others, such as Majrin Banaji and Anthony Greenwald, and their work on implicit bias. Kimberly Crenshaw, I'll talk about her in a little bit later about her work on intersectionality, but really thinking about design thinking, stereotype, microaggression, how all of these fit into a research paradigm. What we wanted to also do is think about the work that we're doing with an asset-based and integrative approach. We wanted to centralize communities and experiences that have been marginalized. And we also want to highlight a data-driven and research-based approach that leverages design thinking, universal design, that it's intersectional as well as anti-racist. And with our faculty, staff, and students as well, we wanted to make sure there were understandings around terms that we often use, but didn't necessarily unpack. So we talked about diversity and how diversity doesn't just limit itself to race or gender, but it's sexual orientation, it's class, it's age, it's citizenship status, it's religion, it's physical or cognitive abilities. And so particularly within our global context, we wanted people to understand what global diversity means and how that plays out in the classroom and creating a sense of belonging. We also wanted to be mindful of ways that we think about equity, right? And the process that's required in terms of taking different people's needs into consideration, along with histories of oppression or disenfranchisement. And we wanted our faculty, our staff, and our students to be aware of that context, as well as inclusion, right? So making sure that there's an active, intentional, and ongoing engagement with diversity in ways that increase awareness and create a culture of belonging for all identities. And that's really one of the things that we focused on within our campus community. And we tried to draw upon scholars and researchers such as Dafina Stewart and others who've used this context of diversity and inclusion and equity and justice in terms of thinking about who's in the room, whose presence is under threat. Have all voices been heard? Have all ideas been taken seriously? Do we have a lack of representation in terms of women or people of color? Are we centering individuals who may be disabled in some way, but we're not finding ways to be inclusive, right? Are there conditions that perpetuate certain majorities? So we wanted to make sure to address these issues and also highlight the intersections that take place. And we shared with faculty, some of their colleagues and peers who are doing this work, like Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. She's actually a faculty member at UCLA and Columbia. She's so phenomenal. And her work really centers on helping us to understand intersectionality as a framework that really highlights multiple power dynamics and systems of oppression that operate simultaneously. And so it's not just about identity, but it's about structures and how they make identities a consequence of and a vehicle for vulnerability. And so I think that for us, it's been a great way within our campus community to think about these terms in ways that we can educate our faculty, our staff, and our students. One of the other areas that we talk about a lot, particularly within the classroom, and as well as faculty in terms of promotion and advancement, but also how we engage with our students, is this idea of implicit bias, right? And understanding implicit social cognition and how attitudes or stereotypes affect our understanding, our actions, and our decisions. And so we really tried to do a lot of work with our faculty, in particular our staff, our research staff, on ways of thinking about implicit bias. And we also done a lot of work, particularly after the George Floyd murder last summer, thinking about anti-racism and ways to identify and eliminate racism within our school, within our units. And we've also tried to be mindful about what approaches to take, right? So being sustained, having proactive education and engagement that's very intentional on the micro and macro level, and making sure that there's a sense of responsibility that people take for their learning while placing the burden on groups that are already marginalized and disenfranchised. That's been really important in terms of our campus engagement and our global work that we've been doing. Ultimately, what we want to do is to create opportunities for intersection, interlocking, and inspiring, really leveraging community, camaraderie, and collegiality to create a culture of inclusion and belonging. And at NYU, we try to do this on a global scale. We remind our faculty and our staff that if we think about research and if we think about the implicit association tests or ways of thinking about this research, how it impacts us on both an individual level, but also on an organizational level, and then how it can play out in organizational practices and biases. And what we've always tried to do as we think about this work is to highlight the fact that climate work is ongoing, right? It's completely work that continues. It's never complete. We can think about this particular study that we did at NYU, but we challenge our department chairs and our school deans to think about actionable evidence, action plans, measures that can be taken, how this fits into departmental goals or questions, and what that means in terms of reassessing what kind of climate we're creating. And as we thought about ePortfolios as a tool, we wanted to create complementary resources for our faculty. We wanted to create complementary resources for our staff and for our students. And so I'll make sure to share with you in the chat our website and our link that we have developed. And you'll see there a faculty toolkit on digital inclusion. This was so important, particularly last year as we were transitioning to online learning and an online learning community. Our faculty wanted to know, how do we address the issues that we see in the classroom that play out in different ways? How are we addressing issues of accessibility? How are we being mindful of the challenges that may exist with first generation college students? And so we've developed a toolkit. It's online, and if you click the link, and I'll again share this in the chat so that you all can have access to it. But we also developed resource guides for our faculty to talk about not just issues related to race and being anti-racist, but other difficult dialogues that we wanted them to be able to integrate into their classrooms. And we also wanted to have a resource guide around what it means to have a responsive dialogue. What does it mean to be in conversation about these issues, and to not necessarily agree, but to understand different perspectives, ideas, and viewpoints when we have these discussions. We also had a number of faculty who asked us to cultivate and develop across disciplines resources that relate to anti-racism, and they wanted to see programming. I'm excited that a number of the programs that we did, both with our Global Scholars and Innovator series, as well as our anti-racism education, we have a number of videos from people who've spoken across the globe about these issues and how anti-racism and how being innovative plays out in the classroom. And so many of our faculty have used these videos in their classroom, whether they're in STEM, whether they're in the humanities or arts and sciences. And so we wanted these to be resources and tools that were used and leveraged, particularly as we think about online learning. But even as we return to in-person learning, it's a great way for faculty to complement what they're doing in the classroom. So I'll be sure to put that in the chat so that you have that resource. I want to make sure that we have enough time today to reflect, apply, and implement what we've talked about, and also to share some learnings and questions as we think about this. I wanted to give you a case study of what we've done at NYU, but I also want to take some time for us to think about what we've talked about today. There was a lot that we shared in terms of our definitions and understanding about what it means to be equity-centric, what it means to be innovative, what it means to have accessible learning, particularly as we think about ePortfolios. And what I want you to do now is to think about ePortfolios as a learning tool. We've talked about NYU's context, but in your particular context, as you think about ePortfolios and students across disciplines, whether in the STEM fields, whether they're in the humanities or the social sciences or the arts, what are best practices that you think will be important for us to be mindful of, particularly as we think about COVID and how students will be grappling with the issue of COVID, in this context in 2021 compared to last year? What are some best practices and ways that you can think of that we should leverage ePortfolios as a learning tool? So if you can share those thoughts in the chat, and I'm also going to put in the OGI website so that you have access to that. But what are some ways that you can think about how we can use the ePortfolios as scholars, as teachers, as educators? What are ways that we can really engage our students? And some of you alluded to this before, but what are some best practices that you will think that will allow us to be effective? And I invite you to share your comments in the chat now. But I invite you to put in your thoughts and ideas about best practices and approaches, the e-portfolios as a learning tool, and how you think about it within your own discipline, but also ways that you think about how it can be useful across disciplines. And then we'll get to the other questions as well that I have here on our PowerPoint today, thinking about innovation, equity, and accessibility. But Paul shared, I think it's really true, making sure that e-portfolio reflection is heard through meaningful feedback. Still learning how to do that as we launch. Love that, Paul, thank you. Any ideas on how to meaningfully give feedback and provide students with a way to not only share their reflection, but also to give feedback and guidance to students as they use the e-portfolio as a learning tool? Other thoughts or ideas about best practices? Ali shared applying a universal design for learning framework. Absolutely. And including that into the assignment design and having a pedagogical approach to implementing e-portfolios. Absolutely. And Ali, if you don't mind unmuting, can you share a little bit more about ways that you think will be most useful to apply a universal design learning framework and what that means in terms of pedagogical approaches?
Sure. I was thinking in particular about the ePortfolio, giving students the flexibility to include so many different expressions of their learning. So, for example, I worked with an instructor in an Indigenous Studies course last year who had students creating memes and telling stories and sharing their knowledge through images. So the portfolio was such a nice venue for students to be able to engage actually in an Indigenous pedagogical approach, or the instructor engaging Indigenous pedagogy to have students express their learning using a different mode and not just valuing, for example, text-based expressions of learning.
That's great. That's great. And what would you describe the impact as in terms of leveraging and engaging in that way?
Well, I think that it helps give students the ability to express their expertise, their knowledge, and their learning in a way that is authentic to them. And when we talk about that belonging and valuing of the student, I think you're getting at that when you're valuing different types of learners and different ways of expressing their knowledge.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ali. And Mark also highlighted that in his work and their department-wide project, they offer students choice in the platform they create the ePort in. And this has helped them tremendously. Mark, if you don't mind, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to share with us a little bit about how that's been useful with your department.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Yeah. So, we started the project about 4 to 5 years ago. In the first year, it didn't go well. We think 2 reasons we failed our students. One, we viewed it as only a product. You're done, you're graduated, share your story, sell yourself. And number 2, we were like, well, use this. This is the university platform. Well, we did a little research, talked to students, reflected in ourselves, and we really figured out that students want this as a process to assist their learning from the first year all the way through their ending year. Don't worry about it being external facing. It'll get there by default. So let's make sure we're having our students be reflective practitioners on each course and experience. We do service learning, undergraduate research, you get the idea. And then the second thing was they didn't like being told what platform. They had really creative ideas. There's a few out there that are really novel. So we gave them a choice, and it has been tremendous for us to watch what they use. Certainly there's a common 4 that they use, right? But it's not always the same. And that's been awesome. So hopefully that helps.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And it's exciting to hear. It sounds like you have buy-in from your faculty, and it seems like it's catching on as an idea and a mode of really engaging your department in a way that's authentic and transformative. Yeah,
well, let me be clear too. There's 26 faculty in the department, and we have this with certain faculty at certain landmarks at the 100 level, 2, 3, and 4. I wouldn't expect every faculty member to be excited about it. That would not be, because some of them might have a research focus, they might have their own focus. Yeah, so we have department-wide faculty from the first year through to the internship at every year, absolutely. But it's not like everybody is, every faculty is asking me what they can do to support it, which is fine. Right.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And some of you have also shared in the chat, in addition to best practices, some of you kind of gone down to the second question that I raised about how do we think about e-portfolios as a learning tool, particularly as we think about enhancing innovation, enhancing equity, and enhancing accessibility. What strategies and techniques will you implement, or what are you thinking about, particularly as we return to campus in our different contexts? Are there particular strategies and techniques that you will implement? So I want you to take some time to think about that, what we've talked about today, what we've learned today, and if there are ways that you can enhance innovation, ways to enhance equity, ways to really enhance accessibility, and are there strategies and techniques that you're going to implement? I'm going to continue to highlight some of the comments in the chat. And I may call on a few of you, if you don't mind, to just highlight what your experiences have been or what you're thinking about, because I think it's really important that we learn from each other and share ways that we've been able to engage our students, but as well as our faculty and our staff. And you'll see at the bottom, there's a question around staff and faculty development. On our campus, we're just really learning now and kind of collectively trying to find out how faculty are using e-portfolios, as well as our Career Development Center. But we also have thought about, what does this mean as a learning tool for our staff? How do we engage this for our faculty as a way to help them to be reflective? And so we're really, we have a team who've been working with the AACU and the ePortfolios initiative. And so this is something we're thinking about not only for our students on the undergraduate and graduate level in our global context, but we're thinking about what does this mean to integrate ePortfolios as a learning tool for our staff as well as for our faculty. And I want you all to continue to put in the chat. I'm going to highlight some of the comments that were raised about best practices for the ePortfolios as a learning tool and specific ways to enhance equity, innovation, and accessibility. But I want to just close. I think earlier, Lisa so graciously introduced me, and I'm going to make sure to put my contact information in the chat. But I want to leave time for us to highlight some of the additional comments that came in the chat, as well as to have some time for questions. But before we go to questions, I want to just highlight a few things that I saw in the chat that I thought were really interesting and tied to the questions that we raised towards the end about leveraging ePortfolios as learning tools, and really thinking about how can we maximize opportunities for innovation, opportunities for equity-centric approaches, and ways to make sure accessibility is integrated into the work we do. And Lisa shared that she partners with faculty and trades to degree programs, and that context matters. But in terms of best practices, she highlighted that it's important to have clear expectations, to have UDL principles, platform support and resources. And Lisa indicated that not all students have the best tech support. And so there have to be alternative modes of curating. And I think that's so true. Lisa, did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, I think that it's such a powerful tool. And I think regardless, I mean, in Canada, and there's people from Canada in this forum, I'm sure, we have some pretty strict privacy laws. So I'm a little envious when I hear, students are free to use multiple platforms and there's sort of free reign there. So you may not have that, but even with, being tied to particular platforms, there's certainly ways that you can customize it for the different contexts. Just keeping in mind, especially the supports, like for us at our institution, when COVID hit, we discovered that 40% of our students were using their handheld devices, which is pretty typical, I'm sure, at other institutions. So we enabled Wi-Fi in our parking lots, for example, because we knew that's how people were accessing. And so just being empathetic and knowing that they may have to curate in alternate formats, I think is a good tip. But contextually, it is amazing what can be done regardless of the context.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa. Quite powerful. And adjusting and being nimble as institutions so that we can create these hotspots and these places of accessibility for students is so important. So thank you so much for sharing that. And then Jason and Sonia also highlighted how, well, Jason in particular shared how uploading videos and having a help desk or resource center for students struggling with ePortfolio technology has been critical. And then Sonia shared that she loves the flexibility on the platform because it emphasizes process. So Jason or Sonia, did you want to share a little bit about what it has been like in terms of having a resource center? Or Sonia, did you want to talk a little bit about the platform and the processes associated with it?
Sure. I think, sorry, I had to switch to my phone because my laptop died.
No worries.
Yeah. So I used I think I used to be pretty rigid about the platform because I was like, this is the one we want to use. There's good reasons behind it. This is the one that's supported. And then it's just, that's a barrier because many students won't use it and then they lose the opportunity for what the value that can be brought. So I just told my faculty the last few years, use whatever, like this is the one that gets support. You may not get as much tech support if you use a different platform, but usually they want to use a different platform because they know it. And so they already have the tools they need to support it. So I think that becomes kind of a non-issue. And then the biggest tech support is access. And so that is the purview of the university, and we can help with that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I think you can see others in the chat timing in saying that they can offer tech support with Wix.com, but they're able to offer the same level of tech support with other platforms, but students can choose whatever works for them. And I know I want to be mindful of time, so I want to highlight maybe one or two more comments and just invite you all to look in the chat for some resources. Ali shared more about Universal UDL, and there's a link there. So hopefully you all can see that. And then Andy raised a question about to Mark about platforms that you use. So Mark, if you can share that in the chat and then how you handle tech support, that would be helpful. And before I turn it back over to Lisa, I want to also just share a comment that Carly made about their program and the fact that it's extracurricular. And so one practice that they emphasize is including and validating experiences that happen outside of the university. And what it does is strengthen students already, coming to the project who may be bilingual or have different experiences within their communities. And it allows them to kind of integrate that back into their work within the classroom. And so thank you so much for sharing that, Carly. I know Mark and others have put in some information about how students have autonomy and the importance of allowing them to be crafty and savvy in using e-portfolios. Sonia indicated that in her program that she coordinates that they offer tech support for PebblePad and the Google Suite, but other platforms can't be used. And the caveat is that tech support may not be available. So it's been helpful, I hope, today to hear how our colleagues are handling these challenges in ways that we can continue to leverage e-portfolios as a learning tool that really promotes innovation, equity-centric ways of thinking about teaching and learning, and also making sure that we're being mindful of what it means to be accessible. And so, Lisa, I want to turn it over to you because I know you have some questions and there's some things that we need to do before we wrap up this morning or / afternoon.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. That was a whirlwind tour, and it was absolutely fantastic to hear your story. And even more important was to get the crowdsourcing of ideas and best practices, which I think was you made my job as a moderator very simple because you've already dealt with all the questions in the chat. So thank you very much for that. I would just like to give my thanks to you personally and to everybody as part in this conversation. And I'm just...
we lost you for a minute.
Sorry about that. I'm just putting into the chat there the link for your feedback, which is also available in the portal document as well. So we are just about at time. I'd like to invite in our last minute or two that we have before we get ready for the next session, if anybody else would like to make a last comment or ask any last questions of Karen. We have 1 or 2 minutes for that before we get ready for our next speaker. So do feel free, don't be shy, do take the mic or pop anything into the chat box.
And I want to thank all of you. You all have been a brain trust this morning. I think that there has been some fantastic links, approaches, methods, strategies. This has really been what I think of as the ultimate brain trust. And we've thought about it, all of us. It's so interesting. Lisa and I were chatting before, she's in Ireland, I'm in New York, but I think you all can see that the work we're doing applies in global context, whether we realize it or not. And there's so much that I hope have learned from each other this morning. But if you have other ideas or thoughts, if there's something that we missed or something that you want to share, please make sure to put it in the chat because I think we'll be able to save it, right, Lisa? And when they...
Absolutely, yeah. We'll be pulling out the chat. Sonia has a question there for you.
Yes, Sonia, please.
Let me see if I get So I was just imagining the idea of having campuses in other places around the globe just seems like such an innovative and equity driven idea. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about, does that help with these initiatives and putting them into action on campus, to have the global connections? Because it seems like there would be just it just seems like that would be helpful.
Absolutely. NYU, it's interesting when you look at our campus in New York, but this is the case with Abu Dhabi as well as Shanghai, there's no one majority group, right, in terms of how we identify race. So it's very, very diverse, and in terms of not just race, but gender, in terms of region, and citizenship. And so coming into the classroom, the faculty are already kind of experiencing a melting pot, and the students are as well. So as they read or as they do problem sets or as they engage across disciplines, there's a lot of cultural engagement that takes place in the classroom. And so I think in a way, we've really had to help our students as well as our faculty understand, how do we maximize these learnings, right? How do we provide appreciation for the different background and experiences that students have? And how do we create ways of understanding that allow us to appreciate culture, even if we don't know everything about someone's culture or background? And so I think our resident staff has done a lot. When we were in person, there were a lot of ways that they help students to understand kind of the interpersonal connections. And once we transitioned to the online learning platform, it meant that we had to create those same type of opportunities for engagement in the classroom, and being sensitive to where students were tuning in, and how do you then bring those learnings into the classroom with an online learning setting. So I really hope you all get a chance to check out our digital toolkit, because it talks a lot about the kind of the cross-cultural and global ways that students have had to engage, in ways that our faculty could think about, well, okay, I'm teaching economics, or I'm teaching this, which may not necessarily relate to global culture or global engagement, but are there ways that I can leverage my student being where they are and relate it to what I'm teaching? So in our digital toolkit online, we helped faculty and we presented some questions to help them think about it. But I think we're fortunate because we've had this kind of milieu of students who've kind of forced our faculty now to really kind of rethink and reimagine it. What does it mean to teach and go according to the canon within my discipline? And how do I do that while also recognizing the diversity that I have in my classroom? And so it's, for many of them, it's been a learning experience. And many of them have said, I've had to adjust and be mindful of adaptation. The other thing I'll say really quickly is, I think for our faculty, the huge takeaway is the neurodiversity, right, in our classroom. So not just the global and cultural engagement, but what does it mean to be neurodiverse, and what does it mean to be neurodiverse and to have that way of teaching integrated into the classroom? And so for our faculty, that has been really phenomenal, so that they have that lens and that approach. If we had more, we could probably do a whole nother session on that, but I hope you all do. I'll make sure to put in the website, again, the link, and you all can see some of the resources that we've developed. And we're in the process now of creating some additional materials that we can share with our campus community, but it's actually open. So anyone here, if you just go to the website, you'll see it. So that was a long-winded answer, but I hope that was helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And yes, there may be different campuses. We may all have different contexts, but we've all faced the same challenge over the last 16 months or so. And I think that's what I found more fascinating. Fascinating is the wrong word, but interesting, that our experiences are the same globally. Probably for the first time ever, we're all dealing with and grappling with the same challenges. So thank you very much for sharing your resources, for your experience, and to everybody for sharing their own best practices and ideas around ePortfolio, and so much more in this session.